version is wire taxes going up. Like all homes across the nation, the town is facing higher costs and higher prices for basic necessities. In particular, inflation has...
Microphone on.
Yes, it's on. Oh,
I mean, the light's not on.
I'll go with this one.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. This year, we're seeing inflation increases, and those in the town budget show themselves in increased cost of materials, salaries, employee health care, and utilities. We're also seeing a large increase in debt service, which is the town's annual bonding costs for capital projects, and there are still educational needs that need to be met as a result of the pandemic. And you'll hear in detail from the boards sort of what's driving these increases. And at the end of the day, we simply have more expenditures, and those expenditures require a greater contribution from our citizens because there was not a co-equal amount of new revenue. So as we begin the discussion, it's the Board of Finance's job to figure out how we will pay for what we are legally obligated to pay and the services state law requires all municipalities to provide. Union contracts are negotiated and approved by the Boards of Selectmen and the Board of Education, not by the Board of Finance. We don't have a role in approving them, but we have a legal obligation to fund them. And those are the largest costs of our budget. So we start with funding what we're legally required to do. Debt service is another legal obligation. When the voters vote for capital projects, they create a legal obligation in future years that we must pay. So debt service is also a legal obligation, another large part of the budget. So we start with what we have to pay. Then we look at fixed costs. What are the fixed costs of running a municipal government? We are a creature of the state, and the state has delegated to us the provision of services that we're legally required to provide. And so we look at what is absolutely necessary to provide those services. There is some discussion as to what's included in fixed costs and what's not, but we start at that analysis. And then after that, we go into other things that the town views as either essential, something that they want to do, something that will lead to economic development. We look at other categories of need after that. So that's sort of the basis of how we do that. We thought we'd start with Amy to show us where we are, where are we beginning. And Amy, if you could just walk us through the numbers narratively so that we can sort of see what's going on.
Sure. So the town operating budget for fiscal year 23 without our ARPA contribution into the fund is about $26,502,521, and then the same number for fiscal year 24, again without the ARPA money, is $27,552. So an increase of a little over $1 million increase in the town operating budget. The ARPA money that we have coming into the fund that we are also spending is the same coming in, the same going out essentially. So what we're spending, we're getting. So it's a flow through, so it's a net zero impact because we had it in the last 2 years. We have the Board of Education budget, which is seeing about $5.3 million increase. And then last year we had some cash for capital of $1.2 million. That has been removed from the budget this year to give us some relief. Therefore showing a decrease of about $1.2 million in our cash for capital. And then as Lisa mentioned, we have an increase in our debt service for one of our larger projects, $6.3 million in debt service for fiscal year 23, anticipated to increase to about $8.3 million for fiscal year 24, which is an increase of a little over $2 million. Down here on our non-tax revenue, funding from our state charges for services, things of that nature. We had about 13 million last year, anticipating a little bit less this year for about 12 million. This was a change mostly in our state reimbursement for motor vehicle. And then again, our ARPA money, which is coming into the fund, but again, up here going out of the fund, so a net zero impact. So an overall increase, net of revenues of about 7.4 million or 7.63% increase.
And just last year, as a contrast, when you see the net amount to be raised by taxes, last year the amount to be raised by taxes was 2.2 million. So that's quite a big jump from what we had to raise by taxes last year. What's driving that a little bit is last year we had more non-tax revenue than the year before, and so that helped get us to where we are. This year, The new revenue exclusive of the revaluation is about 2.3 million. So if you have 2.3 million of new revenue, net 2 million and 7.5 million of expenditures, there's no other conclusion but taxes are going to rise if these numbers stay. So we start with that. It is a dramatic increase from really the last decade and a half. There is a state cap that says municipal taxes cannot go up more than 2.5% or the rate of inflation. There are exceptions to that, and some of that is debt, but I will ask Amy for our next meeting to calculate and make sure we fit within the limits of the cap, because obviously this is above the inflation rate, which is currently 6.4, and it's above the 2.5%, but the exclusions may get us to the right number. But that's something we're going to be monitoring. We've never been in a position where we've actually had to think about the cap. This is the first year we do. So we'll get Amy's advice and perhaps consultation with legal on that one. If you violate the cap, the state penalizes you by reducing your state aid by 50%. So it's really important that we stay within the cap. I think we'll get there with the exclusions, but we'll double check that. Okay, so this is where we start. And now let's go to the budget modeling, because the big question everyone wants to know after what am I getting is what is it going to cost me. So we'll start with what is it going to cost me. Okay, just before we start, for the public, you'll see town operating budget at 30 and 31 million. That's because those include ARPA. We don't have them separated in the model. So about 3.7 million of that is ARPA. So try and subtract that in your head. All right, Amy, why don't you walk us through it?
So up here is essentially the same thing that I just walked you through on the last worksheet. You have your 7.4 net increase and then your 7.63%. So as we move down here, we go through our mill rate, what we need in property taxes to fund, if we do our net expenditures, the 105,677, that's how much we have to collect in taxes.
Amy, just for the public, can you explain how we get to the net?
Yep. So we take our gross expenditures, we subtract out any anticipated revenue, so the state funding, the charges for services, things of that nature, and that gets us to our net expenditures of what we need to raise taxes for. So we take our grand list, we turn that into tax dollars. We have a collection rate of 98.5%, which is what we're anticipating to get. That's what we use for our modeling. And then that gives us our mill rate, or our projected mill rate, of 31.02. And then if you take into the fire district's anticipated mill rate, it gives us 32.24. We're showing a mill rate decrease this year of 6.39, which is due to our revaluation. Since our market has increased substantially, we anticipate getting additional revenue from that, so our mill rate goes down. And then down here, it's just a analysis of what a $350,000, $450,000, $550,000, and $750,000 home impact would be.
Amy, are you using with the fire district or without?
Because the fire district here is neutral. So, I mean, essentially it's the same thing.
Has it ever changed in the last decade and a half? Does anyone know?
I think it changed once, maybe.
Okay. So it's probably going to be 1, 2. So that number is actually a little higher in terms of what you pay for taxes. What is the 1.22 worth? Can you multiply that just so that we have an idea?
Yeah, so 97.28. And then if I were to change this to 37. So that's about another $382.
Yeah, so I have to change the other one because it's not in. Oh, that's the total amount?
Yep.
Okay. It's not at 20.
It was before, and this is what it changed to.
Okay. So you can kind of see the contrasts. When you do the mill rate, that number 562 looks a little bit bigger in our modeling. But it's either way, it's like within, I think, $100, right?
If we changed.
If we did the mill rate, it's 32.24 for all that.
It was an extra $300.
So that's what people are actually coming out of people's pockets more than they were paying last year. Do you need to change the 9165 so that the increase isn't quite so big?
Could I just ask for some clarification here?
Yeah, that's about right.
The number in column F represents what?
Which one?
Say
Bert?
that.
Line item 41, Bert?
Yes, line item 41 in column F. That's the amount of tax paid under the, before the valuation?
No, with the valuation, right, Amy?
With the revaluation.
Assuming a 28% increase in value.
Right.
Okay, so what is the number in column J? What does that represent?
Oh, so J is for an estimated fiscal year 25. It's one of the out
Oh, I
years.
see. Okay,
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second because that's where things
right,
get
okay.
a little bit crazy.
Thank you.
All right, but if you see that, what is a typical, what do I get and what am I going to pay? We know from our reval company that it's about 27.5% to 28% for most people in Simsbury. The very lower ends will pay 30% and the high ends 40%. So as you go through this process, the numbers get starker and starker. Do we have one for 750 in there, Amy?
Yes.
And you're showing that at 40%. So if you're a high-end home, you're going to pay $3,000 more in taxes this year under this scenario. I will say, Amy, can you talk about what happened last reval? So yes, it's bad, but last reval, they got a very deep discount, right?
Right. So essentially during the last reval, the high-end homes, high-valued homes saw a significant decrease between $1,500, $2,000, something around that nature. And then essentially this reval that is correcting where the higher end value homes are seeing a larger increase and the lower value homes are seeing a lower increase, where the last reval it was the opposite. The lower valued homes saw a significant increase and the larger value homes saw a significant decrease.
Okay.
That wasn't necessarily done on purpose, because as we heard on Monday, just for the benefit of the public, they rely most heavily on sales comps in the neighborhoods, and comparable homes. So that really is the bellwether for how they came up. So it's supply and demand. It's not that necessarily this is evening out things. It's just a matter of where things are selling for today.
Right.
The ups and downs of the market.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation. Now, because we're the Board of Finance, we don't just look at this year. We project into future years. I did ask Amy to go back to Francine. In her initial projection, she was anticipating a piece of legislation that will devastate all municipalities, but it's not in the governor's budget, so I asked her to pull that out of her calculations. But we'll ask Amy talk about that in a second. But then we'll take a look at fiscal year 25.
So fiscal year 25. So up here, we did some standard estimates on what we think based on negotiated contracts, some inflation, where we think our debt is going to be, state revenue, et cetera. So then we have our net expenditures, which this is a very large increase, unlikely to be that large. However, for our modeling and things that we put in, for example, we put in about a 1.5% increase for supplies and things of that nature. Some will go up, some will go down. But based on the modeling that we use, we are seeing a 7.62% increase. Again, the $113 million is what we need in our net expenditures to raise for taxes. So we do our tax calculation down here at the 98.5% to get to an anticipated mill rate of about 36.87 or 38.09 with the fire district. So if we use the fire district, you can see our updated numbers for the $448,000 adjusted home value, and you can see that there's a significant increase of about $1,800 for a $350,000 home, 450, 550, and 750.
So in terms of expenditures, when we were initially modeling in, I think it was December, we had projected, based on reasonable projections, a 3.5% increase for Board of Ed and 2.5% for the Board of Selectmen, and we did not come anywhere near that. So I'm not sure that Amy's modeling is that off. Amy, how confident are you on those expenditures?
I mean, it's definitely high, but I don't know how high. So just for example, for our assumptions, when we used safer reference materials, it's 1.5% estimate. I think that's probably not going to happen, but there's other items in here like equipment maintenance or vehicle maintenance or things of that nature where we also have it at 1.5%, where it could be, 2-3%. So, I mean, the estimates are pretty good, but I think they might be a little on the high side. But I mean, they're good estimates to get a gauge of where we're going in the out years.
So can we go back to those what that does to the mill rate and the costs? So you can see, and then looking out, if you look out, if we can get through the next 2 years, it's still not great. Remember, most years we only do a $30 increase in taxes. The best year is going to be $317, but it gets within the realms, or $238. It's not great, but this year and next year, the next 3 years, well, actually this year and next year, I mean, next year is the one that is personally keeping me up at night.
Well, the other thing too is that, we're going from, when people look at where they want to move, they oftentimes look at the mill rate. Well, within 2 years, we're right back up to a 40 mill. The 32 it's just, all of a sudden, the valuation starts circling back on itself because you're not going to get the demand for the homes in Simsbury because it's just not affordable. So, I mean, even at the 350 range, you see your taxes going from what this year to 14,000 within 4 years.
Yeah, just in 2 years, what did they go from, Amy? They started in 2023 from 9 to 11. That's almost, 2,500 in 2 years? Down below, that's over 3,000.
I mean, on average, it's 10% per year over 4 years, from 10 to 14.
Yeah, so I think from where I sit at least, this is not great. So one of the things I think we've said before and we'll emphasize again tonight is when we do our budgets this year, it's not just getting the budgets down or within the affordability range, but thinking about what we can do for next year and the year after that. And we'll go through some scenarios on that. One of the things that's happening next year is because motor vehicle is a look back. Because we have a mill rate of 32, we're going to get the motor vehicle reimbursement this year because it's for last year's what revenue we lost. But next year, that will be gone. So that's on top of part of the reason we're seeing some of those increases there.
How long have we gotten the benefit of the reimbursement from the state?
This will be our second year.
Right, and then so they're not even phasing it out. They're just saying next year, no.
Well, it's based on, because we're at 32 mills, so you only get it for over the 32.
Yeah.
To your point, Derek, we'll start getting it again pretty quick.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Right. So that sort of starts with the scene. So then I asked Amy, well, let's take a look, going back to our initial sort of analysis, how we do it. Let's look at our legal obligations and fixed costs. So Amy put together what our fixed costs were in January. Some of them came down, as you know, health came down 600 in the Board of Ed and about 100 in the town. We can go through all the fixed costs.
So this is just starting with the Board of Education. In January, we had presented fixed costs, which included our salaries, utilities, transportation, pension, health insurance, lap insurance, substitutes, and then use of non-lapsing. So we had projected fixed costs of about $5.2 million. When we go back to our final budget, our fixed costs came out at about 4.3 million. The major changes, slight change in salaries, but the major change here being with the health insurance fund. That's where we saw the majority of our savings. And then for our non-fixed costs, essentially as we were going through the budget process and we were getting quotes, we ended up with an increase in our facilities maintenance expenditures, supplies and software, inflationary increases. Our special education, we were seeing a deficit last year and assuming a deficit this year, about $500,000. Our legal is also under budgeted this year. And then we added a shared services technician with the town. So then that increased our fixed costs by $923,000 to get to our final budget of about $5.3 million.
So Amy, can you go back down to the bottom? So if you think about it, fixed costs are the 4,385. We have to pay that. We're legally obligated to pay that. The other 923,617, you'll see that that's includes special education, which we'd been advised of. That was the reason for the deficit in 2022, the anticipated deficit in 2023. That is a legal obligation of the state. They have to pay for special education, and the costs have gone up. There is a positive development there, and we're waiting to get more information, so that number may come down. The state has changed its reimbursement rate of fixed costs, which is the amount the town has to pay after they've spent a certain 4.5 times the per pupil, or what is the
4.5 times the per pupil expenditure.
Yeah, so then we get reimbursed, and that reimbursement last year was about 1.8 million, right? So it's a sizable amount of money, and we were reimbursed at 68%. That reimbursement rate is going up. It's not clear to us exactly what it's at. Some are seeing substantial increases. Some towns are getting a lot of reimbursement. If that is the case, then that 500 number can come down, probably 100 or 200, but we don't know what that is yet. Amy, will we have that by Tuesday?
Don't know yet. We're going to reach out to the state to see if we can get some confirmation. So depending on what they give us, perhaps.
Okay. So that's a number we're going to be watching in terms of that. Amy, if you were to do a 923,617 versus last year's education budget, what percent increase is that? Non-fixed costs over last year's budget? And you can use the full budget.
1.2.
So it's a 1.2 above fixed cost increase.
1.2 million.
No, 1.2%.
1.2%.
So when you think about those other needs, and Matt, you'll see that they're legal, athletics, facilities, maintenance. That's one where maybe you could, we could take a look at inflationary supplies and software. If you'll remember, during the pandemic, we got a lot of software for free at that time, and now the costs are coming in. So that, I don't know how much they could get that down. Special education is a number that is less certain, but we've now have 2 years of showing deficits in that area. Amy, do you have an update yet on education, what we anticipate that deficit to be in this year's budget?
No, we'll have it tomorrow.
Okay. They're running the numbers with their accountant. So we'll have that for Tuesday when we meet. But you can sort of see where this stuff is coming in. So 1.2% above fixed costs. So now let's go to the Board of Selectmen.
So, same presentation here. We presented the fixed costs at the tri-board in January of our salaries and benefits, our utilities, our pension, our health insurance, and our LAP insurance for fixed costs of about 1257981. And then our updated fixed costs for salaries and benefits, again, utilities.
Wait, Amy, what happened with utilities? That's like almost 3 times as much.
So
Two times.
I think that they adjusted their estimates for what we actually need on top of the inflationary cost, but I can double check with Tom Roy on that.
Because that seems a little bit higher
I can
than,
double check with him on.
okay, so that may come down.
And then our pension, and then again, our biggest reduction is the health insurance, and then we had some savings on our lap, specifically related to our workers' comp.
It looked like pension went up quite a bit too within 1 month.
So pension only went up on the police side, so our OPEB fund is in total, our OPEB fund is 100% funded, but our actuary breaks it up between the Board of Education, general government, and police.
Yeah.
And it's actually the Board of Education and the town that are 100% funded or over 100% funded. They're actually over 100% funded. They make up for the police. The police is not 100% funded. So based on the updated actuary estimates for the police contribution, we added that into our budget.
So Amy,
To get to 100%?
It's whatever the annual contribution would be. I don't know what it leaves
Oh,
that
okay.
percentage at after that.
I understand.
so if we could get an update from Tom Roy on that number, because that seems like that might be an error. Okay. And then on the non-fixed,
Yep, and then on the non-fixed, we saw some inflationary increases on the fleet vehicles, our supplies. We took out our cash for capital for CNR that we did last year, and then overall miscellaneous reductions in multiple line items to get to a decrease of about $193,000.
and Amy,
God,
you know what I'm going to ask next? The percent of,
over the total budget.
yeah.
Decrease of 0.73%.
So the only thing I'll say about the Board of Selectmen budget is that for the last 3 years, and we're projecting for the fourth year, that they are looking at over $1 million in budgetary savings at the year-end close. So we know that there is at least some capacity in there to evaluate. A lot of it has come from the vacancy rate, I believe, Amy?
So there is some savings on the expenditure side, but the majority of the million is coming from additional revenues.
Oh, I thought the last one you said, like we had 800,000 from the vacancy rate at year-end close last time, right? What are we looking at the vacancy rate this year in terms of year-end savings?
I don't know off the top of my head. We budgeted 200,000, but I believe it was only a few $100,000 in savings on the expenditure side, if I recall from the last quarterly. And then there was $1 million. There was the tax collection rate of about 500,000, and then there was the unanticipated municipal revenue sharing money for 500,000. So that was the majority of the $1 million.
Okay, well, I need to double check that. I don't remember the expenditure report, but that's something obviously we're going to be monitoring because there may be capacity to increase. Maria had mentioned when we budgeted the vacancy rate that was a conservative budget. So that may be worth thinking about another 100,000 there. All right, so that's where we sort of start with that. The next thing I asked Amy to do is walk us through then the capital, because when you think about how you can reduce costs, debt service is one of them. That's going to be our biggest driver this year. It's going up another $1 million next year. So what can we do in this year's budget to plan for that? And that means either reduction in some capital, move some projects out, or it means using some of our capital reserve to offset the peak years of debt service. And we would want to budget for that and then make sure that our debt service doesn't exceed that number afterwards so that it's just for the peak time. We did like we did with the Hartford.
So this is our line item that we anticipate bonding for based on the current presentation. So actually, Lisa and I spoke earlier, and we bond every other year. And in my mind, I was anticipating the debt impact would be in fiscal year 25. It's not. So we bond in fiscal year 25 for the projects of fiscal year 24 and 25. But since we do it in the spring, the impact only hits 26.
So nothing we can do for debt service. So the only thing we could do for debt service is to mitigate the increases. Mm-hmm. Can you show us what those numbers are in debt service over the next 3 years? And when they start going down? Because our target is to get debt service to that lower number and not to exceed it.
So our anticipated debt service for fiscal year 24 is about 8.1 million. 25, 8.9 million. Then we hit 10 million. We have a little bit of relief in 27, 9.7 million, 10 million. It stays around the 10 million mark until we get to fiscal year 2032. And then it starts decreasing rapidly.
Could you show us the Barbara Pettigene graph? So when you look at that, why don't you tell it, so the yellow line is our 8%?
Yes.
So our target is 7. Is that the magenta line? So you can see we're way off that for, and what's that year, 2026?
Right. So fiscal year 26 is where we're seeing the increase due to the Latimer, the second, the impact of the second issuance, I believe. And that's actually where we had anticipated being a little over the 8%, and now because our budget has increased to 122 million, it's a little bit under the 8%.
Not the best reason for being within policy, which is why I think probably over the summer, our board is going to give a cap on the amount we can spend on debt service as opposed to as a percent. If our budgets are going to increase this much, it can't be a percent of the budget anymore. It's going to have to be a dollar amount. So Amy, what can we do for planning for that spike where is that 2026? What could we reduce in which budgets to get that lower?
So that's a really good question. We could do, we could utilize our capital reserve to reduce our bonding or help with our debt payments in the out year. We could reduce, essentially, I mean, pray for inflation to go down, and we already have some money built in for next year. There isn't really a ton we can do without just not issuing debt.
What areas could we not, can you walk us through, and you're going to have to say the colors for me, on 26, the black is what we already owe.
Right, so the black line is our existing debt, essentially what we already owe. The brownish line is our fiscal year 23 issuance, which we will be doing within the next 2 months. The dark pink here is our Latimer Lane project. It's our first issuance. And then the light pink is our second issuance for that same project. And then our fiscal year 25 is this blue line for our 25 issuance.
And is our 25 issuance only Latimer, or are there other projects in there?
No, so the two pink ones are Latimer. Those are separated out. Everything else is just our town and Board of Education capital and our CIP plan.
So the blue is just non-Latimer.
Right.
Okay, so for fiscal year, I'm sorry, is that 26? I can't see
Yes.
that number. So in your CIP, anything you can do to push out projects there or eliminate projects in that year, full press effort there.
What makes up the full year 25 issuance, which is that blue that goes above the 7 for both 2026 and 2027? What's in that, or what's the estimate?
Yep, so that is our fiscal year 24 and our fiscal year 25 projects. So it's about 14 million in debt.
And what are the main projects there in 24 and 25?
I have
Flower Bridge is 1.9. I think most of that's bonded.
Is that this year?
Yeah, that's one that we suggested using ARPA dollars for.
Actually, hold on one second. Okay.
At the Board of Education workshop, we also heard that there's an expectation that we're going to need to do substantial work at Squadron Line. Does any part of the blue or the gray sections of that chart represent bonding for Squadron Line?
No.
Uh-oh.
Right.
So for fiscal year 25, it looks like we have some building infrastructure for, oh no, that's ARPA funding, I'm sorry.
Wait, that's what?
Looks like it's
ARPA funding,
ARPA
oh, so that's
funding.
not bonded.
Oh, it's partial. It's anticipated bonding.
Do we know by how much?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, that no isn't right. That's not even included in there. Let me just do it via this way. So it looks like the Henry James roof is part of it, the Tooten Hills. Those are the bigger ones. And then on the town side,
Splash pad.
splash pad.
That's probably going to be pushed out.
Oh, well, yeah.
Doesn't the 24, when does the 24 bonding projects put out? Isn't that doesn't impact the 26?
No, it does. So 24 and 25.
Right, so if you look at the Flower Bridge, we have the 1.9. I don't know what else is under there, Amy.
Right, so you have the 1.9 for the Flower Bridge in 24. You have some elevators for 877. District network, and no, I'm sorry, the modulars for the Terrafil School, about 500,000. Those are probably the bigger ones.
Okay, so those are options to think about using ARPA
We
for.
are, well, I mean,
Yeah.
I've said this a few times. We haven't gone through it at our level, but the potential for using ARPA for the Flower Bridge, which we used ARPA for the design last year. And we talked about this and the board talked about this last year too, but, that would impact 26, right? Most of it is bonded money. It's a public community asset that everybody wanted to use ARPA dollars for. So one of the options, and again, I'll defer to Amy when the time comes, because we're not there yet with our board, to see if that makes a difference, to use it there.
I mean, conversely, it could get pushed out until we can afford it and use ARPA to reduce the burden on taxpayers.
Yeah, Amy, when we reduce, what are we bonding at? What's the rate we're projecting? We had-
Is it 3.5 or 4? Hold on.
I don't think the Flower Bridge can be put out because it's a structural issue at this point.
Is it a life safety issue? Has it
It-
been deemed a life safety issue?
It's getting close to it. It was getting close to it. I don't know.
Yeah, we'd
So-
want an opinion on that.
Yeah,
So
And then
for
in terms of the
25,
roof.
it's 3.5%.
3.5, okay. So how much is that a year? So if you bond $1 million, how much are you paying in debt service on that a year? 10-year bonds?
Oops. $135,000.
So every million you reduce is 135, 2 million saves 250 on operating costs. So it doesn't, I mean, it gets you some, and we need every penny we can get. We're down to, like when Jim and I bought our first house, digging into the couch and pulling out all the coins mode here. But that's something I can say on behalf of the board, we request the Board of Finance the Board of Selectmen to evaluate what can be done to reduce future borrowing costs as you begin. And to Derek's point, it might mean just not doing several projects or moving them out, or using some money to help get us through that peak 2026. So those are things we'll be interested in looking at. But the,
Point of order.
I raised that with the board.
I think it's certainly a functional, helpful thing to do, so yeah, I'm very comfortable with it.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I was curious, we were presented a couple of dam projects to be used for ARPA dollars, and I was just wondering where they fit into the bonding.
They don't.
They don't, so that was something that was scheduled for us just to pay for.
Right.
So the challenges are ahead. One of the things we're doing, I think I sent everyone some my initial benchmarking against other towns, and you'll see some boards of eds are seeing a little bit of an increase. Nobody's seeing the biggest, I think ours, based on what I've seen so far, Amy, ours is looking like the biggest tax increase at this point. So we're not entirely understanding why that is, although I think most of it is driven by two things. One, healthcare came in higher, and we hope that that will come down next year. And then, of course, debt service, which we knew and have been planning for. So those are two huge drivers just right there. What is the total cost of healthcare at this point?
Between the Board of Ed and the town.
Mm-hmm.
Is $1.8 million.
So that's 1.8 million and 2 million in debt service. That's 4 million of that 7 million right there. The 3 million would be more in the range that we're seeing other towns do. So, and is there any way locked in, we'll have better numbers between now and the end of March?
Highly unlikely, but we can always ask for an update.
We'll definitely ask the last week before March.
Are arbitration determinations coming in consistent with other towns? They
Yeah.
are?
Yes.
Given that, and given the lumpiness of education bonding, I mean, we're constrained in terms of numbers of levers that we can pull here.
We are constrained. This year more than, I mean, the only thing we have is that 3.7 million in ARPA, and everything. I think Wendy is right, and I think Amy's right, to the extent we can. Let's try and get those bonding costs down.
Did Farmington bond for the school? Do you know if they've bonded for their project at the high school? Yeah, or it's probably phased as well.
Yeah.
I'm just curious,
I'm sure they
this
would
is
have
kind of
to.
in a box, because if last year, for example, Farmington had a huge increase in their, education budget or budget in general because of, higher, interest costs, or, it just looks like at 299, they're coming in at 3%. Maybe last year they had a 12%, so it's not entirely apples to apples here. But I mean, if you look at, it looks like Glastonbury, for example, had a reval. Anybody with grand list percentage over really 2.5% probably saw a reval this year. Is that fair to say?
I'm not sure, maybe. And then on the Farmington one for their project, I don't know when they're starting their bonding process either.
Okay.
So that could be like a year out or 2 years out, depending on when they're putting shovels in the ground and what they think their cash flow is going to look like.
I know there is this one city in the wealthy section in our Gold Coast, and they were not tracking their debt service, and they're having a huge spike coming up, and they are scrambling to figure out how they're going to deal with that. So we are monitoring it. We did know this was coming. It's unfortunate that it happened the same year that the health hit. That's bad luck. But we'll go from there. We are keeping the health reserves at, I think we're down to 21% now, which is still within range. But it's, we're hovering on the low end. So we'll watch what happens there. I want to open it up to thoughts. Can you go back to the mill rate modeling and let's do some scenarios? The grand list is not going to change dramatically between now and then. Is that correct?
Between now and fiscal year 25.
No, between now and May.
Oh, no. No.
So, Amy, I am going to ask you something, and I don't know how you evaluate it, but Francine has put in about $5 million in the grand list, anticipating appeals. Is that conservative compared to what other towns have estimated? Is there any adjustments there that could be reasonably made, or everyone very comfortable with that?
So I would have to get her take on that. The $5 million, I believe that's something that David used as well, and I think it's based on past court cases, if I were to guess. So I'm sure she's pretty comfortable with that number.
And just for members of the public who might not have been at our last riveting meeting.
Monday?
Yeah, that really went well.
2 days ago?
One of the things that struck me is the reval company said that one of the biggest increases in tax valuation were apartments. And so we can anticipate, and they're also one of our biggest taxpayers, their biggest category of taxpayers. I think they make up a good part of our top 10. So given those two things, you can anticipate appeals there and follow up. So that will be sort of interesting to watch and track as well. So let's go through a scenario. And we'll just go with the Board of Ed. And I'm not saying we're cutting the Board of Ed just because it's an easy number to cut where you don't have to go back to the model. What happens if we reduce that number by 500,000?
That's a good question. Maybe if my computer was to work, I could tell you. It was going so well.
It takes about 3 million to reduce 1 mil.
1 second, I'm just gonna try again. There we go. Okay. I'll just share again so everybody can see. $500,000 you said?
Yeah, let's start with 500.
So just for reference, your beginning is the 32.24 and 10,110. I'm gonna reduce it by 500,000.
Pimple.
That's all right. Oh, because I have a formula in here. I have to reduce this by 500,000. Why won't it take?
Wait, so it's a rounding error.
Yeah.
That's better.
Amy, are those tied to the expenditure report? Because when I did it, I could just do it in the expenditures.
Oh, you know what? Because I hard-coded the mill rate when we changed it to the fire district. Hold on, just let me
Oh.
reset it. That's why. Okay. There we go. That's better. All right, let me share this one. All right, so now we start at 31.01 for the town, or 31.02 with 97.28. And then if we reduce 500,000, it goes down about 0.15 mils, or in tax dollars, about $47.
That's about $47. So to get it down another 100, if we did 1 million, it would get it down another 47, so about 100. Okay. So any way you look at it, this is tough.
What would be the increase in taxes with the $500,000? And I'm looking at it as a percentage increase, really, is kind of how I'm thinking about it. So the Board of Selectmen's budget is up what percent? 0.17%?
No.
That's with the million,
Oh, yeah.
so.
So call it 3.5%.
Mhm.
And what would it take to get the school operating budget down to 5%? Was that 1.5 million?
Yeah. So about 1.5, about $1 million, a little bit more to get to down to 100.
How about to get it to 6.4%, which is the current inflation rate?
Oh, I thought he said 5.5%. Did you say 5.5%?
No, I just wanted to see it at 5% increase. And you did, it was a million and a
you
half.
had it.
Half, yeah.
Yep.
And then to get it to 6.5%?
I think that is.
How much of a reduction is that? How many dollars?
350,000.
350.
So I think the two things that we control are ARPA funds and non-bonded capital. And it looks like this year and next year are the most painful years, right?
So Amy, could you do some scenarios where we look at doing some assignments this year for next year to mitigate debt service in the two spike years?
Sure.
I guess where I'm going is, maybe it's another year of two of an R&M plan as opposed to a replacement plan.
What is R&M?
Repairs and maintenance, as opposed to, the full project. We really just need to buy ourselves, if I look back to that chart, if I'm thinking back to that chart correctly, that we need to buy ourselves a couple of years. Because even in those out years, those increases, they're not as substantial they're still substantial,
Right.
but they're not as bad as this year and next year.
Right.
And then that blue block, which is all non-bonded capital as of right now, if we bonded nothing.
Planned bonded, you mean?
Yeah, if we bonded nothing, would be below our 7%.
Is that right, Amy?
I think so. It would be really close to it too.
Okay, so,
So it's but we can control that. We
right.
can control that bonding. We can control that blue line. And we can also control the ARPA funds.
Right. So I think, thankfully, what I'm hearing from the Board of Selectmen is they are on board with understanding what the problem is and the tools they have to address that problem. One of the things, do we put a challenge to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed to sort of see, is there a way, can you get this number down by 500,000? And that could be done either assigning some money, using some money to do some debt service this year and the next year and the next few years. It could be done by looking at what consolidations you can make. Let's hope that the reimbursement rate for excess costs comes in better than we expect, and that would take that down with no pain. I don't know if between the two boards and debt service, anything can be done to get that down about 500,000, but I'd like to put it out there as a challenge to see if we can get closer to that. I guess what we're saying is there's not a lot of appetite to see that number increase at this point. Is that?
Well, can I see the inflation adjustments on some of the capital items for the Board of Ed again? Makes up about the $1 million. I think it was 963. That was in addition to what was proposed in January, the January-February comparison.
Oh, the fixed costs?
Yeah.
Sure.
So the non-fixed costs, we can control that as well, right? Other than the special ed line item, is that right?
Well, facilities maintenance, maybe, supplies and software a little bit. How much did that go up over last year, Amy?
Supplies and software.
Yeah.
The software was around 10%, the supplies are around 5%.
So that's really only,
I guess my question, are those line items in the budget, or are those just overages?
No, those
No,
are
they're
in the
in-
budget.
Those
Okay.
are-
Those are the actual budget numbers, not the overages.
no, they're above, right? They're the above number. That's
In
not
other
what
words,
we're
we're
talking about.
budgeting for facilities maintenance, supplies and software, special ed, legal and athletics, and shared tech service. We're already budgeting for that.
We are budgeting for those.
And
right?
these are the increases over what we budgeted?
Right.
So technically, we can control that, right?
Probably
It
not
says-
special
It says
education.
non-fixed at the
Yeah.
top.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So I think there's $1 million on the table right there that we should be able to get them to figure out how to
Well,
get more thrifty with.
I don't think we can do the special ed because they were in deficit last year and they're
So
going to be deficit. One of the things I had on facilities maintenance, Amy, can we get a comparison on square foot? How many maintenance workers per square foot? Do we ever do that analysis? Are we within range there?
No idea, I could ask
Okay.
Jason.
I mean, that's a number to, when things are tough, you sort of look at facilities maintenance. And I think, is any of that equipment? And if it is, can that be taken out of the operating budget and put in the CNR budget? So no tax impact, so no program impact, but tax relief?
I mean, you'll get, the superintendent's budget presentation on Tuesday, and some of the themes that you'll see there is Jason he did a really nice job. He put together a 6-year CNR, and kind of like the town, we're not even close to meeting our needs at that 550,000. And then on top of that, we haven't really been maintaining our facilities. We've been repairing them, but we have not been appropriately maintaining them. And then with the budget freezes the last couple of years, I mean, we've had freezes on everything. So the facilities are part of taking that hit. So, I mean, it'd be a collaborative discussion on how we approach that, but the facilities maintenance piece, I'm not sure if there would be a ton of flexibility there, if they would rather look at a different category.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean,
yeah.
and the thing about the Board of Ed is, I mean, we can make a suggestion to them, and then after the budget passes, they have the
Right.
freedom to decide how they want to allocate it. But when I think about facilities maintenance, I think, are there other funding pools that we could maybe get the same result without a tax impact? So, and that's one that comes to mind also with software. So oftentimes we do that through CNR. Most of the CNR requests are from the town, very few from the Board of Ed.
So we have our 550,000, which is not,
But there's an additional pool of money, and what is in our capital reserve right now that's available for use?
was it 1.9 million, I think?
Yeah. And how much is the Board of Selectmen planning on using this year of that?
Seven, five, and so about 600,000.
Pardon?
600,000?
So that would leave 1.3 million? We do not yet have a policy on how much reserves we should have in capital reserves, but we're anticipating $1 million at the end of year close as of last quarterly, right, Amy? So that will be replenished. I know Glastonbury, I think, has their percent. They try not to get below 500. So to me, I see capacity there. If we needed to in the next 2 years to get that down a little bit, especially if there's more money coming in. I know we have a CIP plan, but it would be, the other request I'll make to the members of the Board of Selectmen, Maria did not feel she had the resources to prioritize capital. We request that the Board of Selectmen do that, because there may have to be adjustments made, especially in the coming years and the out years.
We'll just assume that they're all the highest priority and just have to kind of choose ourselves based on dollar amount.
Well, hopefully, we can get some priorities, at least for the current year.
I don't know how many times
Yeah.
we've mentioned at this meeting that we'd like a list of prioritization for capital, so.
Yeah. So we did make a number of requests, and I just briefly went through the book to sort of see where we are. And first of all, thank you. The pages, the budget books are numbered, so we are grateful for that. And I think that the public will be as well. We did, a glossary is included, so thank you to, who did that, Amy?
Our intern Franklin.
Please thank Franklin for that. And next year, could we put it in a tab where the public can find it? It's in the supplementals now, so the public might not be aware that it's there.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Are we
Yeah.
moving on from the discussion?
Oh,
on it?
No, I was going to.
Because
We don't have to.
No, what I would like to give some firm guidance. This was the point of going through this to the
Okay.
boards, and my recommendation, it's painful. $500,000 I don't think is enough. I think we need to go, I would have liked to target a 5% increase for the Board of Ed, and that's, I think, generous. If $1 million is 5.5 or to 6%, I would encourage them to try and find as close to $1 million as possible in their budget. It's not going to be easy this year. It sure as heck isn't going to be easy next year. And as much as it is to try and, again, dig for nickels and dimes in other areas of the budget, the real meat is in the Board of Ed budget. We need to figure, there's going to have to be, I think, at some point, a reduction in fixed costs, and I know there's going to be pushback on that, but the out years is what I'm most concerned about. It's next year as well, without the reimbursement from the state on auto, I think is really meaningful, and it's almost going to be too late for these people who see their tax bills. So I would like to try and get ahead of it and not kick the can. We're all going to have to make tough decisions here. And then especially on capital, I think everything is on the table under that blue line of bonded projects. I would go so far as to say we should be using ARPA to mitigate the increases, solely mitigating the increases, and not be used for capital, based on the impact of what we're seeing over the next 2 years.
You mean new capital? ARPA for,
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that would be my 2 cents on the discussion and why we're here.
no, you're
tonight.
right.
And I'm
You're right to have
open
the
to hearing
conversation.
any other, ideas or thoughts from the rest of the board,
Well,
but
thank you for that. I kind of jumped ahead. Let's go through and let's hear from Mike and Bert. We'll let you guys start, and then Art.
I appreciate what Derek said, and I tend to agree with what he said. The thing that I'm combining that with is what Bert said earlier about the Board of Ed only a matter of time coming forward with a significant project for Squadron Line, right? So we keep talking about the out years getting easier if we can get there, but I don't see us getting there, right? So we're just gonna need to start figuring out ways to start tightening the belt.
Bert?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I mean, I think what we saw today is an elaboration of the basic facts we discussed on Monday, which are that we only have $2 million, a little over $2 million in new growth, and we're projecting $7.5 million in new spending. And next year, we'll have fewer resources and the same kinds of needs. I don't have the background or expertise to tell exactly where the pruning needs to come. And there are policy decisions that are going to have to be made, but it's certainly not the case that this is something we can take lightly.
We've rolled up a budget with arbitrary salary increases and then this lump of the bonding. And they're all essential things. And as Derek has said, we don't seem to get priorities. And The problem is when you roll it all up, it comes to a large whack to the taxpayer, which we're seeing right now. I mean, I agree with the concept that we can look at it and say, what can we take out of it? It's hard to legislate that until we know exactly what it's going to be. So I'm uncomfortable with the amount of tax increases, which are there for understandable reasons. I mean, our buildings deteriorate. It's not as though we put money aside every year because we know we're going to have to build buildings. We wait and then we bond them. And then the bond hits and oh my gosh, we got a tax increase. Well, here we are. I'm in favor of taking a look at what percentages. I'm reluctant to state what that percentage will be until we know exactly what the cost is. But okay, we've rolled it up and it's too much. So can we now can we say we take a target, but if it were to be this, what would you cut? And then let's look at the specific things. I don't think we can legislate simply a mandated cut to this percent. I want to know exactly what those items are that would be eliminated if we were to do that, but I am certainly empathetic with the effort to do so.
Yeah, I think I'm probably aligned. I mean, I think we're all aligned, and I think I'm aligned with everyone on this board that we're uncomfortable with the spending this year, but alarmed with what's happening next year. And anything we can do this year to plan for that. I'm probably more aligned with Art in his approach in terms of, I'm not sure I have the expertise to say what can be cut and what the impacts would be. But I would ask both boards to take a hard look at alternate sources of fundings. Let's try and get that number down. We went through the pandemic. We saw that we could do more with less. And so that was a window of opportunity to see what our core services are that you never get. I mean, that was the one silver lining of the pandemic, is we really saw what our core services were and what we really need. And unfortunately, given the scenarios that Amy thinks are realistic, we're entering a very, very tough time. So I know Derek is comfortable giving a dollar amount, and I think he should, because
Well,
we're all one vote.
I would just caveat it by saying, I know it's a stretch target for the Board of Ed.
A challenge.
Yeah, I know that number would be enough of a challenge for the Board of Ed. I think just based on, kind of history and the reductions that have been made in the past, all that still resulted in an increase. So I think it's a stretch target, but I think it's one that should be, contemplated.
Yeah, I mean, from the Board of Selectmen, I'd like to see that come down more in the 600 to 700 range increase. I mean, we had originally planned on a 2.5 there, right? Amy, what is the $700 range for the Board of Selectmen? What percent does that bring them to? We've known in the past they've had increases.
$1.16.
Pardon?
1.16.
A macro observation, I guess, could be, because that's where we are right now, is that we recognize that we're not going to be able to continue with the revenue increase that we've constrained over the past couple of years. We've done very well the last few years.
Yeah.
And I think that's commendable. Secondly, we're looking at the big chunks of this budget, and we recognize that they are solid and they cannot be reduced. Therefore, there will be a revenue increase this year. And I think, at least for me, I recognize that's going to take place, and that we're probably going to have to recommend to the voters of Simsbury a revenue increase larger than we want it to be. But now that we've all rolled it up, we're looking at it, that is still too big. And therefore, I think it's perfectly acceptable to go back and say, we've got to cut this some. And whether we do it by throwing out a percentage target or asking for priorities, I'm flexible on that. But I'm not comfortable with proceeding with the extent, with the amount of tax increases that we've rolled up to this point.
Okay, so I don't, we're kind of at consensus that we would like to see reductions as the boards meet to consider their budgets at this point. We are, I think all of us want to do what's in the best interest of the town. There isn't one of us. I do want to say there is no plan at all to cut teachers. We are not saying that. And I
Well,
want
we
to.
can't legally.
Well, you can reduce the budget. We can't reduce what you pay them, but there's no
Right.
plan to do that. We understand that education is a top priority. I think or at least not for everyone, but for a large part of our community, education, people move here for the education. We understand that. We understand that in a municipality, a lot of the money does go to public safety and public works because those are core essential services that we're required to provide. And so we don't want to reduce services any more than anyone else. This is not in thinking about punishing or wanting to hurt anyone or be mean. This is just looking at what is coming this year and what's coming next year and how do we plan for that and get that as condensed as we can. I think at this point, I don't know, in some ways, we're not giving dollar number. Matt always says to me, what's your number? But we're in the position where I think Art said, well, we can't tell you the number until we know what the service impact is, except that we want you to go back and take another look and try and come back to us with some creative ways. We've asked Amy to look at what we can do, not only for this year, but future years in debt service. Derek made that point in terms of looking at what capital projects of repair and maintenance as opposed to new at this point.
Madam Chair, I would just introduce the reflection that your statement of how Simsbury places high priority on education, as confirmed by polls and surveys, is established by the fact that we have an arbitrated increase in the salary for teachers and that we're bonding for Latimer Lane School. I mean,
Absolutely.
We've started by saying that is a priority, and that is by far the largest part of our budget, and the budget increase.
Absolutely. And I'll just remind folks, I mean, we're looking at this budget in isolation, but our budget process began actually earlier in the year when we did a supplemental appropriation for Latimer Lane, when we did a supplemental appropriation for our trails, when we did a supplemental appropriation for our bleachers. So it's not been in isolation, and we forget that that was part of the decision-making that we made. So those were the priorities, because we passed them. So everything else is a lower priority than what we've already done. So I don't know, you probably would like better guidance than us, but that's probably the best we can give you at this point. Anyone else? Okay. Then just going, can I go on to what we need?
Oh,
Okay.
no. I defer to the chair.
No, you were right to do that. Thank you. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. I did not see in Maria's book, but I haven't looked at it carefully. We did ask for a summary of any new budgetary savings or offsets. I saw the list that we gotten over the summer, but any new initiatives in this budget would be great. Maybe that's included in the list. I don't know. So Amy, if you could just verify that or highlight any new initiatives in this budget. In a few areas, cash for capital and debt service, or capital and debt service are combined in the supplements. It's still combined, so please remember to separate those out. We had asked for when Maria delivers her budget that we get a draft budget document and a draft notice of the referendum so that we can understand what it is we're sending to the voters to come to. It's the Board of Finance public hearing. We need to see the draft of what the public hearing notice is. The draft budget document is what we post at the end of the budget cycle after we've done our mill rate, but we'd like to see it in advance so that we understand what those numbers are and before we pass it. Sometimes we see it afterwards as it's not formatted, or there might be changes that we hadn't seen. So we'd asked for that. Those are not documents that need to be created. Those are documents that we're just asking for a little bit in advance, and that Maria and Amy thought that they could get to us. Thank you for adding the line for contingency to project sheets. That was a Derek suggestion. I did not see a total cost for projects in there, so if we could add the total cost just for the CIP this year. We have asked the Board of Selectmen to rank and categorize capital. I did see that you included links to master plans where applicable, so thank you for that. I did not see estimated and projected start and completion dates for capital. We're going to need that for the current year for just the CIP, not for CNR. I did see that you separated out for the most part funding sources on separate lines, although we saw just going through that, sometimes they're combined and you can't tell how much bonding is in a certain line, which makes it difficult to know what we can cut. I did see a lots of grant being budgeted this year and the out years, so thank you for that. We had asked for a summary of capital grants applied for but not budgeted, and an anticipated timeline for notification of awards so that both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance can make policy calls as to whether to budget for them. And sort of crucial to, and I think mentioned by Derek and other members of the board, is to indicate the number of years a project has been on the CIP. For us, it's important that multiple boards have had a chance to consider it and move it forward. And if it hasn't, I think we'd like an understanding of how it jumped to the front. In the transfer tab, it has expenditures, but I didn't see revenues. So if we could understand what the revenues are, and if you could separate ARPA so that we can see what is ARPA and what is not. It was a little hard to tell.
I think it was all ARPA. I'll double check that one though.
I just didn't say the word ARPA, so I couldn't tell. I think it is. And we list transfers as revenues as well, but I didn't see revenues in that line. And that's, I think, just the summary of just what I saw. And these are not new requests. Obviously, we made these in November, so no one should be surprised. Just what I observed, and it's possible I misobserved them because I did look at the books very quickly, and I do want to acknowledge all the additions that they made up upon our requests. Interestingly, both the charter and state statutes allow Board of Finances to make formal requests, and which boards are obligated to provide to us so that we can do our duty. So we are not mean people, so we understand if that can't be done, just let us know. And we can find alternate ways to get us the information we need to help communicate to the public. Again, one of the challenges this year is going to be how we communicate. What am I getting? To Art's point, it's hard to know what to cut unless you understand what it is you're getting and what it is you need. And then how are we going to pay for it? And I think to everyone's point, it's not just this year, but next year. And how are we going to communicate the potential problem that's facing us next year? And how are we planning for that? And I just want to make sure we're communicating to the public so that it's sort of a brace for impact 2 years. And so the people can begin planning their finances. So that's what I have. Is there anything else for the good of the order at this point?
I believe that was a very comprehensive ask. Achievable one. Are you looking for a motion?
Yes.
So I'll move effective November 15, 2022. Oh, no.
Oh, you don't have to do that. That's the old motion. Oh,
this
I was
is the
looking
old
for a motion to adjourn.
I'll be happy to provide that.
I was about to say that I thought there might be some candidates on Zoom who were willing to do that, but thank you for your initiative.
Thank you. We have a motion from Bert. Is there anyone who would like to second the motion?
I will second Bert's motion. From Bert, if I may call him that.
Thank you, Mr. House.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, everyone.